Imagine for a moment that you are utterly alone. The air is cold, recycled, carrying the faint antiseptic scent common to all advanced alien vessels. Before you stretches a vast amphitheater of a courtroom, but the faces looking down are not your peers. They are a gallery of the galaxy's most powerful species. Their features a mosaic of chitin, iridescent scales, and shimmering light, and in their multifaceted eyes you see not curiosity, but condemnation. Your fate has been discussed, debated, and decided in languages you cannot comprehend, long before you even entered the room. This is the precipice upon which Captain Eva Rostova finds herself, a single human standing against the collective judgment of the stars. It's a scenario that taps into one of our deepest, most primal fears, the terror of being unjustly accused, of being silenced before you can even speak in your own defense. This is the powerful opening scene of a story that challenges everything we think we know about justice, power, and what it truly means to be human in a cosmos that seems determined to see us as monsters. The charge is grave, delivered with cold, final authority by the Galactic Federation prosecutor. He declares, the human species has proven its violent nature by violating the sacred non-interference Accord of Sirius. In that one statement, an entire planet's worth of people with all our art, our compassion, our complex history, is reduced to a single, damning label, violent. And Captain Rostova stands there, silent, her hands bound not by physical chains, but by a legal and political machinery designed to crush dissent. The trial, you quickly realize, is not a search for truth. It is a performance, a carefully orchestrated spectacle meant to legitimize a verdict that was written the moment a human starship entered a forbidden sector of space. The stage is set not for justice, but for a monumental injustice. Yet within this stark tableau of despair lies the seed of an incredible narrative. What happens when the quiet, dignified silence of one person meets the roaring prejudice of an entire galaxy? This is not just a story about a trial. It is a story about a moment of rupture, a point where the carefully constructed narrative of human inferiority is about to be challenged in a way the Federation could never have anticipated. We are about to embark on a journey into the heart of a galactic conspiracy, to explore the resilience of the human spirit when it is pushed to the absolute brink. We will witness not just a legal defense, but a profound reclamation of dignity. So, settle in, because we are going to uncover the shocking truth behind the accusations, the hidden motives of the Federation, and the single spoken word that would echo through the corridors of power, changing the fate of humanity forever. But that carefully constructed illusion of human brutality begins to solidify with the prosecution's first piece of evidence. The main holoprojector at the center of the amphitheater flickers to life, casting a cold blue light across the chamber. What it displays is a scene of undeniable horror. We see the unmistakable silhouette of a human vessel, the Odyssey, against the star-dusted void. Then, a lance of brilliant energy erupts from its hull, striking a smaller, elegantly crafted ship marked with the peaceful emblems of the Xylosian species. The recording shows the Xylosian vessel shuddering, its hull plates peeling away like petals in a firestorm before it vanishes in a silent, devastating bloom of light. The courtroom is deathly still, the image burning into every retina. Then the Xylosian ambassador is called to the stand. Their form is slender, almost fragile, with large, luminous eyes that now swim with what appears to be profound grief. In a voice trembling with anguish, the ambassador points a delicate limb toward the frozen image of the explosion and cries out, "Our children, our future." They were on board that vessel. The humans showed no mercy, no warning. It is a masterstroke of emotional manipulation. The gallery of alien delegates erupts in a chorus of hissed clicks and rumbling disapproval. The visual proof, combined with the raw, theatrical pain of a supposedly neutral party, seems to seal humanity's fate. The narrative is complete. Humans are ruthless, unpredictable killers. And the true genius of this injustice, the most insidious part, is the rule of procedure that Captain Rostova is now reminded of by the presiding magistrate. A cold, automated translation drone intones, "The accused is permitted to observe the proceedings, but may not directly question evidence deemed conclusive by this court." In other words, she is forced to sit in silence, watching this blatant fabrication be presented as unimpeachable truth. She cannot point out the inconsistencies in the sensor logs. She cannot demand a forensic analysis of the energy signatures. She cannot even ask how a research vessel supposedly carrying children ended up in a quarantined sector of space. Every instinct to shout objection is stifled. The noose isn't just tightening, it is being presented as a formality, a necessary step before the trapdoor swings open. This moment transcends mere legalese. It becomes a profound violation of the very principle of a fair hearing, demonstrating that the trial was never about discovering what actually happened, but about validating a predetermined conclusion. Amidst the oppressive weight of the prosecution's fabricated evidence, a new figure enters the stage of this cosmic tragedy, though he brings no comfort. Eva's court-appointed defender is a Glirin, a species known for its pacifism, and as becomes immediately clear, its profound aversion to conflict. He shuffles toward her, his slender, gray form seeming to fold in on itself, as if to present the smallest possible target to the hostility of the chamber. His voice, when he speaks, is a barely audible whisper, translated by the drone at her collar into a sterile, hopeless monotone. He does not speak of legal strategies or points of contention. Instead, he offers a single, devastating piece of advice. "Captain Rostova," he murmurs, "the most logical course, the only path that offers any semblance of mercy, is to plead guilty. The verdict was reached before you arrived. Resistance is not only pointless, it will only amplify the sentence." He explains that a confession would likely see her sentenced to a neural recalibration, a polite term for a complete mind wipe, rather than permanent imprisonment or execution. It is presented as a kindness, the only sliver of compassion in a system designed to break her. This moment is a critical turning point, far more significant than it might first appear. The defender's counsel is not born of malice, but of a deep-seated cultural logic that sees confrontation as the ultimate evil. To the Glirin, accepting an unjust fate with quiet dignity is preferable to a furious and ultimately futile struggle. His advice encapsulates the very essence of the Federation's power over humanity. It isn't just about physical or legal force. It's a psychological warfare that seeks to make us complicit in our own erasure. They want Eva to agree that she deserves this punishment, to internalize their narrative of human guilt so completely that she willingly surrenders her own memories, her very identity, for the sake of a peaceful resolution. It is the final, chilling step in the process of dehumanization. But as the Glirin lawyer continues to whisper his bleak pragmatism, Eva's gaze drifts away from him, scanning the impassive faces in the gallery. And then she stops, her eyes lock with a pair from the shadows of an upper tier. This observer is different. Unlike the other delegates who display their emotions openly with clicks of disgust or flashes of bioluminescent scorn, this figure is utterly still. Their features are obscured by a heavy, nondescript robe, but the intensity of that shared look cuts through the courtroom's atmosphere like a laser. It lasts only a second, but in that moment, something unspoken passes between them. It isn't a smile or a nod of encouragement. It is a simple, profound act of witnessing. In a chamber where everyone else sees a monster or a statistic, this mysterious figure sees her. That single, silent connection does what all the threats and legal manipulations could not. It ignites a defiant spark within her. The offer of a merciful oblivion suddenly feels not like a kindness but a betrayal of herself, of her crew, and of every human who would be judged by this fraudulent verdict. The seed of hope, tiny and fragile, takes root not in a promise of rescue, but in the simple, powerful realization that she is not as alone as they want her to believe. The oppressive silence of the recess chamber was a stark contrast to the orchestrated outrage of the courtroom. Eva stood alone by a viewport, the swirling colors of a distant nebula doing little to calm the storm within her. The Gliran Defenders' counsel to surrender her very mind echoed, a chilling offer that felt more like a death sentence than the physical one she potentially faced. It was in this moment of profound isolation that a presence materialized beside her. She hadn't heard anyone approach. A figure, shrouded in a heavy, nondescript robe that obscured all features, stood unnervingly close. Before she could react, a cold, smooth object was pressed into her palm. A data crystal, its surface etched with unfamiliar glyphs. A low, urgent voice, filtered and hissed as if through a vocoder, whispered words that struck her with the force of a plasma bolt. The Xylosians are not what they seem. Their research was a bioweapon test. Find the truth in the black box. And just as quickly as they appeared, the figure melted back into the small crowd of court functionaries and observers, vanishing without a trace. This wasn't just a clue, it was a key thrown into her prison cell. The accusation was so monstrous it reframed the entire trial. A bioweapon test, the implications exploded in her mind. If the Xylosians were developing a weapon, then their presence in a forbidden sector wasn't an accident, it was a deliberate operation. The destruction of their ship, the event for which humanity was being crucified, might not have been an act of unprovoked aggression, but something else entirely. Perhaps a desperate act of self-defense or something even more complex. The phrase, "the black box," was equally critical. Every Federation vessel, including her own destroyed ship, the Odyssey, was equipped with a hardened data recorder designed to survive even the most catastrophic event. The prosecution had presented sensor logs, but they had never mentioned recovering the Odyssey's black box. Its absence from the evidence was now a glaring, suspicious omission. The trial wasn't just rigged, it was actively concealing the one piece of evidence that could reveal the full story. The simple act of receiving the crystal transformed Eva's role from a passive victim into an active participant. She was no longer just defending herself against a false charge. She was now investigating a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of the Galactic Federation. The hooded figure's identity was a mystery, an ally from within the Federation itself, or perhaps a rival species with its own agenda. It didn't matter in that moment. What mattered was that someone, for some reason, had judged the truth to be worth the immense risk of contacting her. That single act of defiance validated the spark of hope ignited by the silent observer in the gallery. She was not just a symbol, she was a captain, a commander, and now an investigator with a mission. The data crystal felt heavy in her hand, a tangible piece of a puzzle that, if solved, could shatter the Federation's entire case and expose a threat far greater than humanity had ever posed. The recess was ending, and she was returning to the courtroom not as a condemned prisoner, but as a soldier preparing to fight a war of information on a battlefield where the truth was the most powerful weapon of all. As the recess ends and the court reconvenes, the atmosphere shifts from one of simmering outrage to one of grim finality. The prosecution, confident and unhurried, makes its final move. They call no more witnesses. Instead, they activate the main holoprojector one last time, displaying a single, damning log entry. The text is crisp, official, and bears the unique command signature of Eva's own first officer, Commander Liam Chen. The entry is brief, a time-stamped communique from the moments before the engagement. It reads, "Captain's orders are clear. Target is hostile, weapons free." Shoot to kill. The words hang in the air, and the effect is catastrophic. This isn't just censored data or the emotional testimony of an ambassador. This is an internal ship's log, a record from within the Odyssey itself, seemingly confirming the prosecution's entire narrative of premeditated violence. The forgery is a work of sinister genius. It preys on the most fundamental bond of Starship Command, the trust between a captain and their executive officer. Commander Chen was more than just her second-in-command. He was a friend, a man she had served with for years, whose loyalty she would have staked her life on. To see his name and signature attached to such a monstrous lie is a personal betrayal that cuts deeper than any legal accusation. The prosecution doesn't even need to elaborate. They simply state that this evidence, combined with the visual record, creates an undeniable chain of culpability. They have the weapon, the act, and now the direct order. With a theatrical flourish, the lead prosecutor announces, "The Galactic Federation rests its case." He turns to the three judges on their elevated dais, his posture radiating absolute certainty. And the judges themselves are the final, chilling piece of this judicial machine. As they lean forward, their expressions are a study in cold disdain. One is a Vorlon, his reptilian features immobile, his forked tongue flicking out as if tasting the scent of guilt in the air. The second is a Thul, her insectoid carapace gleaming under the lights, her multifaceted eyes reflecting 100 tiny images of Eva standing alone. The third, a being of swirling gaseous energy contained within a suit, pulses with a slow, ominous rhythm. These are not impartial arbiters. Each species on that panel has a long and bloody history of conflict with humanity, territorial disputes that have festered for generations. Their presence was never an accident, it was a guarantee. They look upon Eva not as a defendant in a trial, but as a representative of a hated rival finally brought to heel. The silence that follows the prosecution's conclusion is heavier than any gavel slam. It is the silence of a verdict already written, waiting only for the ceremonial pronouncement. Every being in the chamber can feel it. The performance is over. The predetermined outcome is moments away. All that remains is for the judges to speak the words that will condemn a species. In the wake of the prosecution's chilling finality, a profound silence descends upon the chamber, thick with the anticipation of an inevitable verdict. The three judges exchange a glance, a silent communication of shared purpose, and the Vorlon judge begins to lean forward, its mouth opening to deliver the condemnation that will echo through history. But before a single syllable can be formed, a clear, steady voice cuts through the oppressive quiet. "I wish to address the court." Every head turns. It is Captain Rostova. She has risen to her feet, her posture straight, her gaze fixed not on the gallery of hostile faces, but directly upon the judicial dais. The request is so unexpected, so contrary to the script of passive acceptance they had written for her, that it causes a visible ripple of confusion. The automated translation drone hesitates for a moment before processing her words. The lead prosecutor recovers first, a sneer evident in his tone. The accused has no right to address evidence already deemed conclusive. "Your defender has already been," but Eva interrupts him, her voice gaining a new, steely resonance. "I am aware of my defender's role, and I am formally dismissing him from this proceeding." A collective, sharp intake of breath whispers through the courtroom. To dismiss one's own legal counsel, especially in a capital case, is an act of profound recklessness in any culture. The Gliran defender looks up at her, his large eyes wide with a mixture of shock and pity, but he offers no resistance, simply shrinking back into his seat as if grateful to be removed from the spotlight. Eva continues, her words measured and deliberate, each one falling like a stone into the still pond of the courtroom's expectation. "If I am to be condemned," she states, her tone devoid of plea-bargaining desperation, yet ringing with an unshakable finality, "I will do it with my own voice." This is not a legal maneuver, it is a moral one. In that single declaration, Eva Rostova reclaims her agency. She rejects the entire framework of the trial, the false evidence, the biased judges, the counsel that advised surrender. By choosing to speak for herself, she forces the court to confront not a caricature of human violence, but a living, breathing individual. She transforms the spectacle from a foreclosure of humanity's fate into a genuine dialogue, however unequal the footing. The unease that ripples through the judges is palpable. The Vorlon's forked tongue flicks out more rapidly, a sign of agitation. The Thule judge's carapace shifts with a faint, grating sound. They fear this deviation not because her words hold any legal power within their rigged system, but because her act of defiance introduces a variable they cannot control: authenticity. Their script called for a silent, defeated human, a neat conclusion to a messy problem. Instead, they are faced with a captain who refuses to be silenced, who insists on injecting the messy, complicated truth of her own experience into their sterile narrative. The performance is no longer going according to plan, and in that rupture lies the first faint crack in the foundation of their entire case. The silence that follows her declaration is absolute, a vacuum waiting to be filled. Every eye in the chamber is locked on the solitary human figure who has just appended the entire proceeding. Eva does not wait for permission. She turns her gaze from the stunned judges to the lead prosecutor, her voice cutting through the tension with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The prosecution's case rests on a selective presentation of data. She begins, her tone not accusatory but disarmingly factual. They have shown you a visual recording of the engagement and a single, isolated log entry. But the standard operating procedure for any Federation vessel, including the Odyssey, is the continuous, real-time streaming of all primary sensor logs and command communications to a secure, off-site backup server via a dedicated quantum-entangled frequency. This is Regulation 724.5, a fail-safe designed precisely to prevent the permanent loss of data in the event of a ship's destruction. A wave of murmurs breaks the silence. The prosecutor's confident sneer falters for a fraction of a second. Eva presses on, her words gaining momentum. The prosecution has stated under oath that the Odyssey's logs were destroyed. Yet the backup frequency, known as the echo stream, is designed to survive even the total atomization of the vessel. Its data repository is maintained by the Federation's own central archives. She pauses, letting the implication settle over the room like a heavy fog. Therefore, I formally request that this court subpoenas the complete, unedited sensor logs from the Odyssey's echo stream, from the moment we entered the Sirius sector until the moment of the engagement. The prosecutor finds his voice a bluster of outrage. This is a baseless distraction. The echo stream for that vessel was compromised. The frequency was jammed. It is the exact reaction she anticipated. Eva's response is immediate and devastatingly calm. That is a fascinating claim, because the echo stream protocol, by its very quantum-entangled nature, cannot be jammed by any known technology. Its integrity is fundamental physics. She takes a single step forward, her gaze sweeping across the judicial panel, no longer a supplicant but an equal demanding accountability. The prosecution cannot have it both ways. They cannot claim my ship's data is both destroyed and compromised, so I will make this simple. She leans slightly forward, her voice dropping in volume but intensifying in gravity, forcing everyone to listen carefully. If the Galactic Federation has nothing to hide, if the evidence against humanity is as conclusive as you claim, then you will have no objection to submitting this complete data set to the court. Let the Odyssey herself bear witness, show this court everything. The effect is electric. She has masterfully turned the tables, shifting the burden of proof and the shadow of suspicion back onto the accusers. The demand is unassailable in its logic. By invoking their own regulations and the unbreakable laws of physics, she has constructed a trap from which the prosecution cannot easily escape. Refusing her request now would not look like the dismissal of a frivolous motion. It would look like an admission of guilt, a desperate attempt to conceal the very truth they claim to champion. The three judges shift uncomfortably on their dais. The Vorlon scales seem to tighten, the Thol's mandibles click softly, and the gaseous judge's pulses quicken. They are no longer in control of the narrative. Captain Rostova, with a single, brilliant legal and rhetorical maneuver, has forced them into a corner, and the entire galaxy is watching to see what they will do next. The judges, cornered by the unassailable logic of her request, had no choice but to concede. After a tense, hushed conference on their dais, the lead Vorlon judge announced in a clipped, irritated tone that the court would grant a brief procedural delay to examine the status of the requested echo stream data. The pronouncement was a masterpiece of bureaucratic evasion, offering the appearance of cooperation while implying the entire exercise was a waste of the court's valuable time. But it was a victory nonetheless. For the first time since the trial began, the relentless march toward condemnation had been halted. As Eva was escorted from the chamber by impassive robotic guards, she could feel the weight of 100 hostile gazes upon her back, but among them, she also sensed a new, unsettling emotion, nervous anticipation. She had thrown a stone into the stagnant pond of Federation procedure, and the ripples were spreading. Her temporary holding cell was a stark, sterile cube, devoid of any comfort beyond a simple cot and a sanitized food dispenser. The silence here was different from the courtrooms. It was a vacuum, heavy with the echo of her own thoughts. She clutched the data crystal, the smooth surface now warm from the heat of her hand. This small object was no longer just a clue. It had become the focal point of the entire galactic conflict. The judge's reluctant agreement to check the data was a tell. It confirmed her suspicion that the echo stream existed and that its contents were so damning to the prosecution's case that they had to actively suppress it. The real trial, she realized, was no longer happening in the amphitheater. It was happening here in the shadows, a battle over information where the data crystal was the ultimate prize. The hours stretched into an artificial night cycle, the cells lighting dimming to a faint, gloomy amber. Eva feigned sleep, her body tense beneath the thin blanket, every sense heightened. She had expected a digital attack, an attempt to remotely wipe or corrupt the crystal. She was prepared for that, but the conspiracy proved to be far more brazen and physical. The softest whisper of displaced air was her only warning. A section of the wall, seamless to the naked eye, slid aside without a sound. A figure clad in form-fitting, light-absorbent black armor slipped into the room, moving with an unnatural, liquid grace that marked him as a professional. His features were obscured by a full-face helmet, and in his hand he held a device that glowed with a faint, menacing purple light, a neural disruptor, set to a setting that would render her unconscious without a trace. Her training took over. As the operative lunged, she rolled off the cot, using the momentum to put distance between them. The disruptor's beam crackled past her ear, scorching the wall where her head had been. There was no time for questions, no room for negotiation. This was an assassination attempt, not a theft. They weren't just after the crystal, they were after her, to silence the one person who knew to ask the right questions. The confined space of the cell became a brutal arena. He was enhanced, his movements preternaturally fast, but she had the desperate strength of someone fighting for her very existence. She blocked a strike aimed at her throat, using his own momentum to throw him against the cot, which crumpled with a shriek of tortured metal. The fight was a savage, silent ballet of survival. It was not the choreographed spectacle of a Hollywood duel, but a gritty, desperate struggle where every move was aimed at disabling or killing. She managed to land a solid blow to his knee joint, hearing a satisfying crunch of composite armor. He grunted, his movement faltering for a critical second. In that opening, she seized the only weapon available, a segmented leg from the shattered cot, and drove it like a spear into the armored plating over his shoulder. The operative staggered back with a choked cry, his disruptor clattering to the floor. He glared at her through his visor for one final, hate-filled moment before stumbling back through the hidden panel, which hissed shut, once again becoming a seamless wall. Eva stood panting in the sudden silence, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The cell was a wreck, the air smelling of ozone and her own sweat. The data crystal was still safely tucked away, but the attempt had revealed a terrifying new layer to the conspiracy. The Federation, or a powerful faction within it, was not merely content to rig a trial. They were willing to send covert operatives to murder a defendant in a maximum security cell to protect their secret. The trial itself was just the public facade. The real war was being waged in the darkness, and by surviving this attack, Eva had just been promoted from a pawn to a primary target. She was no longer just fighting for a verdict. She was fighting for her life against an enemy who would stop at nothing to bury the truth. The atmosphere in the courtroom the next day was electric, with a tension far different from the grim certainty of the previous session. The judges, having been forced into a procedural delay, now presided with a palpable wariness, their previous air of condescending finality replaced by a guarded vigilance. All eyes were on Captain Rostova as she stood, not in the defendant's dock but in the center of the chamber. The prosecution had reluctantly granted her the right to question witnesses, a concession wrestled from them by the sheer force of her previous logic. Her first and only target was the Xylosian ambassador. She began not with an accusation, but with a request for clarification, her tone respectful, almost deferential. "Ambassador," she started, her voice calm and clear through the translation drone. "The court has heard your tragic account of the loss of your people. To ensure the record is perfectly clear, could you please confirm the official designation and primary function of the vessel that was destroyed? The Starlight Weaver, was it not?" The ambassador, perched gracefully on the witness platform, nodded his slender head, his large eyes projecting an aura of wounded innocence. "You are correct, Captain. The Starlight Weaver was a deep space biological research vessel dedicated to the study of microbial life in nebula clouds. Its mission was one of pure science." Eva nodded slowly, as if absorbing this information, and such a specialized mission would require equally specialized equipment. "Could you describe for the court the primary payload, the core instrumentation that would have been on board?" The ambassador, seemingly reassured by her line of questioning, launched into a detailed, almost poetic description of neutrino spectrometers, quantum lattice containment fields for volatile organic samples, and long-range pathogen sequencers. It was a convincing list, the kind of technical jargon that sounded both impressive and benign. The gallery listened, many delegates appearing to sympathize with the ambassador's scholarly dedication. Then Eva's approach shifted subtly. "Thank you for that thorough description, Ambassador. Such advanced equipment must be incredibly massive. The containment fields alone, by standard Federation specifications, require a gravitic stabilizer weighing no less than 500 metric tons. Is that accurate?" The ambassador hesitated for a fraction of a second, a flicker of uncertainty in his luminous eyes. I am not an engineer, but that sounds correct." Eva pressed on, her questions coming faster now, building a scaffold of technical facts. "And the neutron shielding for the spectrometer, another 300 tons at minimum." The ambassador agreed, less certainly. "And the structural integrity required to support such weight, coupled with the power conduits for the ship's systems. The hull plating on a vessel of that class would need to be a minimum of 12 centimeters of reinforced duranium-titanium composite. Is that the specification for the Starlight Weaver?" This time, the ambassador's pause was noticeable. He glanced briefly toward the prosecution table, a fleeting, almost imperceptible look. The Starlight Weaver was a unique design, he ventured, his voice losing its melodic quality. "It utilized advanced, lightweight materials." "Advanced materials," Eva repeated, her tone shifting from inquiry to assertion. She turned to the central holoprojector. "Display the public registry specifications for the Xylosian vessel Starlight Weaver, hull classification, research." The screen flickered and the data appeared. Eva's voice was razor-sharp. According to the Federation's own registry, which your government submitted, the Starlight Weaver's hull density is listed as 4.2 grams per cubic centimeter. That is not the density of a duranium-titanium composite. That is the density of a standard aluminum-scandium alloy, typically used in civilian transport shuttles and unarmed diplomatic couriers. She turned back to the ambassador, her gaze unwavering. A ship with a hull that light could not possibly carry the equipment you just described. The mass would have compromised its structural integrity during any moderate acceleration. The physics simply do not add up. The courtroom was utterly silent. The ambassador seemed to shrink on the stand. There must be an error in the registry, he stammered. That is one possibility, Eva conceded, but then she delivered the final, devastating blow. Or there is an error in your testimony. A research vessel carrying 500 tons of sensitive equipment cannot have the hull density of a pleasure yacht. The only type of ship that prioritizes low mass and high speed, while still requiring a large internal volume, is one designed for a very different purpose. A ship that light, ambassador, couldn't carry the equipment you claim. The mass is all wrong. It wasn't a research vessel. She paused, letting the silence build to a breaking point before her voice rang out clear and absolute. It was a warship. The word hung in the air, more explosive than any accusation she could have made. The implication was catastrophic. If the Starlight Weaver was a warship, then its presence in a forbidden sector was an act of aggression. The entire foundation of the case against humanity crumbled in an instant, replaced by a far more terrifying question. What was a Xylosian warship doing in the Sirius sector, and what was it truly carrying? Eva had not just caught the ambassador in a lie. She had exposed the first, frayed thread of a conspiracy that now threatened to unravel the entire Galactic Federation. Chaos erupted. The implication that the Xylosians had sent a warship, not a research vessel, into the forbidden sector sent a shockwave through the gallery. The chamber, once a stage for quiet condemnation, became a cacophony of alien voices, a discordant symphony of clicks, hisses, and rumbling exclamations. Journalists from 100 different species scrambled to relay the explosive development to their homeworlds. The illusion of a straightforward, tragic narrative had been shattered, and in its place, a far more dangerous and complex truth was beginning to emerge. The three judges on the dais were no longer merely agitated, they were visibly alarmed. Their control over the proceedings was disintegrating with every passing second. The head judge, the Vorlon, slammed a scaled fist onto the console before him, a sound that cut through the din like a thunderclap. Silence, he roared, his voice amplified to a deafening volume by the chamber's acoustics. This court will maintain order. The accused will cease this line of baseless speculation immediately. His multifaceted eyes burned with a fury that was no longer just judicial disdain. It was the rage of a puppet master whose puppets have suddenly started cutting their own strings. He pointed a clawed digit at Eva. Your attempt to slander the victims of this atrocity is contemptible. The testimony of the Xylosian ambassador is a matter of record. But Captain Rostova did not flinch. She stood her ground, a solitary figure of calm defiance amid the storm she had unleashed. Your Honor, she said, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the lingering echoes of the judge's command. This is not speculation, and it is not slander. She held up the data crystal, which now seemed to gleam with a malevolent light. The evidence I present next is not from Federation archives, which appear to have been selectively edited. It is from a source that witnessed the events from a different perspective. She turned her gaze from the enraged judge to the bank of holocorders operated by the Galactic media, making eye contact with the billions now watching across the galaxy. The court has heard one side of the story. It is time they heard the other. Without waiting for permission, she strode to the witness terminal and inserted the crystal. The prosecution shot to their feet, shouting objections, but their voices were lost in the tense anticipation that gripped the room. The head judge was about to order the guards to restrain her, but it was too late. A new audio file began to play, its sound raw, unfiltered, and crackling with static, as if recorded from a great distance or through heavy interference. A voice filled the chamber, speaking in the distinct, melodic yet sharp tones of the Xylosian language, with the translation drone providing a sterile, simultaneous overlay. The voice was cold, professional, and utterly devoid of the grief-stricken tone the ambassador had employed. It said, "The human ship designation Odyssey is on approach vector to the test zone. All units stand by, prepare the ambush on my mark." The effect was instantaneous and profound. The words test zone and ambush hung in the air, sucking all the sound from the room. For a long, agonizing moment, there was absolute silence, broken only by the soft crackle of the audio file. Then, a low murmur began to swell from the media section. It was not the outrage that had greeted the prosecution's evidence, but something far more dangerous to the Federation's case: doubt. The media representatives were not delegates with political agendas. They were observers tasked with reporting facts. And the fact they had just witnessed was a direct, undeniable contradiction to the official narrative. The Xylosians, the supposed victims, were not peacefully researching, they were lying in wait. The human ship was not an aggressor, it was walking into a trap. This was the turning point, the moment the trial ceased to be a local affair and became a galactic scandal. The audio fragment was too specific, too damning to be dismissed as a forgery without a serious investigation. The head judge, his authority crumbling, could only watch as the seeds of suspicion, planted by Eva's logical dismantling of the ship's specifications, now burst into full bloom with the chilling clarity of a military order. The story was no longer about whether a human had fired a weapon, it was about why she had to. The case against Captain Eva Rostova was, in that single, spoken sentence, irrevocably broken. The damning echo of the Xylosian military order had barely faded before the prosecution table erupted into a frenzy of desperate activity. The lead prosecutor, his composure shattered, was on his feet, his voice a strange shriek demanding to be heard over the growing murmur of the gallery. "Preposterous, a transparent forgery," he shouted, pointing a trembling limb at the now silent holoprojector. "This is a classic human deception, a crude audio manipulation designed to distract from their crimes." Recognizing that the narrative was slipping through their fingers, they made their last calculated move. They called to the stand a witness they had undoubtedly hoped to keep in reserve. He was introduced as Scholar Vex, a Zeta Reticulum cyber forensics expert of renowned reputation. With a bulbous head and slender limbs, he moved with an air of detached intellectual superiority. In a voice that was smooth and condescending, he laid out his analysis. He spoke of digital artifacts, waveform inconsistencies, and synthetic voice print generation, using a cascade of technical jargon meant to overwhelm and confuse. His conclusion was delivered with absolute, rehearsed certainty. "The audio fragment is a primitive fake," he stated, his large black eyes sweeping across the judicial panel. "Its spectral signature does not match known Xylosian communication protocols. It is a human fabrication, created with technology available in their own Black Ops laboratories." The attempt to deceive this court is as blatant as the original act of aggression. It was a masterful counterattack designed to muddy the waters. By attacking the authenticity of the evidence itself, they could dismiss the terrifying implications of its content. For a moment, the strategy seemed to work. The judges who had been thrown into disarray latched onto this lifeline of plausible deniability. The Vorlon judge nodded slowly, a grim satisfaction returning to his reptilian features. The tide, which had so dramatically turned, seemed poised to shift back, but Captain Rostova had anticipated this. She waited until Scholar Vex had finished his pronouncement, allowing his words to settle into the chamber. Then she rose. She did not shout, she did not protest. Instead, her voice was chillingly calm, a stark contrast to the expert's arrogant certainty. Scholar Vex, she began, her tone almost conversational. You have testified that your analysis is conclusive. You claim the audio is a forgery based on your examination of its digital properties. The scholar inclined his head. The science is undeniable. Then you will have no objection, Eva continued, her gaze locking with his, to subjecting the file to a live, public analysis. Right here, right now, a wave of whispers swept the room. She turned to face the judges directly, her posture radiating an unshakable resolve that silenced the gallery. I propose a simple test, one that leaves no room for doubt, a test that uses the one system in the galaxy considered infallible in matters of truth. She paused, letting the anticipation build to an almost unbearable pitch. The Federation's own veracity algorithms. The reaction was instantaneous and profound. The term veracity algorithms was not just technical jargon, it was the bedrock of interstellar law and commerce. These were the immensely complex, self-correcting artificial intelligences used to verify everything from high-stakes treaties to financial transactions worth trillions of credits. Their judgment was considered absolute, their analysis beyond reproach or manipulation. To question their results was to question the very foundation of the Federation's integrity. The prosecutor stared at her, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. Scholar Vex shifted uncomfortably, his confidence visibly wavering. Eva pressed her advantage, her voice rising in volume and intensity, cutting through the stunned silence. You have your expert, I have my evidence. Let us end this debate once and for all. She took a final, defiant step forward, and in a voice that resonated with the weight of her entire species' future, she issued a challenge that was also the ultimate gamble. Run the audio file through the primary veracity core. Let the Federation's own system be the judge. Analyze it for digital tampering, for voiceprint authenticity, for any sign of forgery. Do it live for the entire galaxy to witness. She then turned her head, looking directly at the lead prosecutor, and delivered the 5 words that would seal her fate one way or the other. I will bet my life on the result, a heartbeat of absolute stillness, and then the command that was both a plea and a demand. Run it now. The silence that followed Captain Rostova's challenge was heavier than any verdict. It was the silence of a galaxy holding its breath. The head judge, his reptilian features a mask of conflicted fury, knew he had been checkmated. To refuse the veracity algorithm now, after such a public demand, would be an admission of guilt so blatant it would shatter the Federation's credibility forever. With a curt, reluctant nod, he authorized the connection. A massive holographic representation of the Federation's primary veracity core materialized above the courtroom, a swirling, luminous lattice of data streams and logic gates. The audio file was fed into the system, and the entire chamber watched as the intricate algorithms began their work, tracing every byte, analyzing every frequency, and comparing every sonic signature against the known parameters of trillions of recorded Xylosian communications. As the silent, dazzling display unfolded, Eva knew this was her final moment. The gamble was laid, but she had one last card to play, the ultimate context for the evidence that was now being judged. She turned to face the gallery, her voice calm yet carrying an immense weight. You have all wondered where this evidence came from. You have accused me of forgery. But the truth is, this data was delivered to me by someone who could no longer bear the weight of this conspiracy. His name is Kalen, a former senior operative of the Viridian Intelligence Directorate. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The Viridians were known as the galaxy's most elusive and principled spies, masters of information who valued truth above all else. Kalen was not disgraced for incompetence. Eva continued, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. He was exiled, his career destroyed for the crime of telling an inconvenient truth. For years, he filed reports warning the Federation Council of Xylosian expansionism, of their clandestine weapons programs and their ambition to dominate key galactic sectors. He provided evidence of their violations, but his warnings were ignored, his reports buried by officials who found the Xylosians to be valuable trading partners. He was labeled an alarmist, a paranoid agent trying to start a war. The man who tried to prevent this conflict was cast out, while those who enabled it sat in judgment. Her story painted a devastating picture of systemic failure, of a government so committed to peaceful appearances that it willingly blinded itself to a growing threat. Then, as if on cue, a new data stream, encrypted with Viridian signature codes, pulsed into the court's main receiver. Eva, acting on instructions given to her with the crystal, initiated the decryption sequence. Kalen risked everything to contact me, and now he transmits one final gift to this court. The holographic display split. On one side, the veracity algorithms continued their relentless, impartial analysis. On the other, a new file began to play. It was a record of clandestine communications, time-stamped from the weeks leading up to the trial. The voices were digitally scrambled, but the Viridian decryption keys peeled back the layers of secrecy. The words that emerged were not those of Xylosian commanders, but of the three judges sitting on the dais. They were negotiating with a Xylosian intermediary. The Vorlan judge spoke of consolidating territorial claims in the Cygnus Rim once the human nuisance was removed. The Thul judge bartered for exclusive licensing of advanced Xylosian plasma forging techniques for her species' war industries. The gaseous judge, its pulses fluctuating with greed, secured promises of an unlimited energy source derived from Xylosian technology. The bribes were not crude transfers of wealth. They were strategic geopolitical payoffs, promises of power and technological supremacy offered in exchange for a guilty verdict. The evidence was irrefutable. The judges of the Galactic Federation, the supposed arbiters of justice, had been bought and paid for by the very species posing as the victims. In the courtroom, all hell broke loose. The Vorlan judge shot to his feet, roaring denials that were drowned out by the outcry from the gallery. The Thul judge clicked her mandibles in a furious rhythm, while the gaseous being's containment suit flared with dangerous energy. But their protests were meaningless. The live feed of the veracity algorithms, which had just completed its analysis, flashed a single, universal symbol across the massive display, a radiant blue checkmark of authenticity. The accompanying text scroll confirmed it in stark, objective terms. Audio file analysis, 0% evidence of digital tampering. Voice print match to Xylosian tactical command, 99.999% certainty. Conclusion, genuine. The two streams of truth, the cold, logical verdict of the machine and the hot, corrupt reality of the judge's betrayal, collided with cataclysmic force. The prosecution's case didn't just crumble, it evaporated. The trial was not merely rigged, it was a puppet show, and Captain Eva Rostova had just torn away the curtain to reveal the puppeteers, their hands soiled with greed and their mouths full of lies. The authority of the court disintegrated in that instant, replaced by a roaring vacuum of scandal that would soon engulf the entire Galactic Federation. A single, unified scream of disbelief rose from the assembled delegates, a chaotic symphony of outrage that shook the very foundations of the chamber. The holographic verdict of the Veracity Core, that brilliant blue checkmark, was not just a finding of fact, it was a demolition charge set against the pillars of galactic justice. In that instant, the carefully constructed facade of impartiality evaporated, revealing the raw, desperate corruption beneath. The head Vorlan judge, his scales flushed a blotchy, panicked purple, shot up from his seat, his claws scraping furiously against the console. He pointed a trembling, accusing digit at Eva, his voice cracking as it boomed through the amplifiers. This proceeding is terminated. The evidence is contaminated. The human is guilty, guards seize her. It was a command born of pure, unadulterated terror. The judicial robots, their programming overriding any emergent logic, hummed to life and began their advance toward the center of the room. But they were no longer the only force in motion. The revelation of the judge's bribes had shattered the illusion of unity. A faction of delegates from species with their own grievances against Xylosian expansion, who had until now remained cautiously silent, now saw their chance. A burly, rhinoceros-like Brivac ambassador stood and bellowed, "This is an outrage, the court is compromised." His roar was echoed by a chorus of support from others. At the same time, loyalists to the Xylosians and the corrupt judges also rose, shouting accusations of their own, creating a wall of sound and confusion. The chamber devolved into absolute pandemonium. The scene was no longer a courtroom but a political battlefield. The advancing robotic guards found their path blocked not by Eva, but by a phalanx of Brivac diplomats who stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a living barrier between her and her would-be captors. "You will not silence the truth," the Brivac ambassador growled, his horns lowered in an unmistakably threatening posture. Across the room, a Xylosian aide drew a concealed energy pistol, only to have it knocked from his grasp by the swift tail strike of a reptilian saurian delegate. The galactic media, far from fleeing, pushed their holocams closer, broadcasting every second of the unprecedented meltdown to a stunned universe. The rule of law had been replaced by the law of the jungle, and Captain Eva Rostova was at the eye of the storm. Amidst the shouting and the shoving, Eva did not cower or try to flee. She stood resolute, her eyes fixed on the judicial dais. The other two judges, the Thul and the gaseous being, were frantically gathering their robes and attempting to retreat through a private exit, their authority utterly dissolved. But the Vorlan judge remained, trapped by his own failed gambit, hissing commands that were lost in the din. It was then that a new, authoritative voice cut through the chaos, amplified by a command-grade vocal projector. "Stand down, all of you. By the authority of the Galactic Sentinel Guard, this chamber is now under our jurisdiction." Through one of the main entrances, a squad of soldiers marched in perfect formation. They were not the court's simple custodial robots. These were the Sentinel Guard, the Federation's elite internal security force, answerable only to the highest council. Their armor was polished silver and deep blue, and they moved with an efficiency that immediately commanded respect. The squad leader, a tall humanoid with stern features and cybernetic eye implants, scanned the room. He ignored the squabbling delegates and the retreating judges. His gaze fell directly upon Captain Rostova. He strode toward her, the crowd parting before him. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed the guard had arrived to enforce the head judge's unlawful order. But instead of seizing her, the squad leader stopped before her and offered a crisp, formal salute. "Captain Rostova," he said, his voice firm but respectful, "the Council of First Ones has seen the broadcast. Your life is under our protection. You will be escorted to a secure location where you can give your full testimony." The betrayal was complete. The highest governing body of the Federation had effectively declared the trial null and void, and in a stunning reversal, the accused had become the most protected witness in the galaxy. The guards who were meant to drag her to a mind wipe were now her honor guard, and the journey ahead was no longer toward a cell, but toward the heart of power itself, to finally expose the conspiracy in its entirety. As the Sentinel Guard formed a protective cordon around her, a different kind of energy coursed through Captain Eva Rostova. The moment of rescue was not a moment of relief, it was a moment of reckoning. She saw the retreating, corrupt judges, the squabbling delegates, and the holocams still broadcasting live. But she also saw the larger picture, this secure location they promised, this testimony before a closed council, was just another room, another set of procedures where the truth could once again be filtered, manipulated, and buried for the sake of political convenience. The conspiracy was not defeated, it was merely wounded, and wounded beasts are often the most dangerous. To let them whisk her away now would be to surrender the one advantage she had fought so hard to gain, the live, unfiltered attention of the entire galaxy. With a subtle, practiced movement, Her thumb found a hidden recess on the side of her standard-issue wrist communicator, a device every prisoner was allowed to wear for basic timekeeping. But this was no ordinary device. It was the final gift from Kalen, the Viridian agent, a masterwork of clandestine engineering disguised as a simple chronometer. As the head of the Sentinel Guard gestured for her to follow, Eva met his gaze and gave a nearly imperceptible nod, a performance of compliance, but her other hand was activating the transmitter. A tiny, almost invisible indicator light on the comm glowed a faint amber for a single second. The signal was not aimed at the court's internal network, which was undoubtedly compromised. It was a tight beam, high-gain burst piggybacking on the live media feed's own transmission protocols, shooting past the courtroom walls and directly to the nearest interstellar comms relay. From there, it would fan out at the speed of light to every ship, every colony, every news outlet in the sector. Then she stopped walking. She planted her feet firmly on the polished floor of the chaotic chamber and turned to face the nearest holocam. The guard squad leader reached for her arm. "Captain, we must move," he urged, his voice low and insistent, but Eva shook him off, her voice rising above the din, not in a scream, but in a clarion call that carried the weight of centuries of human defiance. "You wanted a human to speak," she cried out, her words echoing through the amplifiers and now via her hidden transmitter across the void of space. "Then listen," she held up her wrist not as a threat but as a beacon. "This transmission contains the unedited evidence of judicial bribery, the proof that this trial was a sham from the beginning. It is being broadcast to every vessel in this sector on an open channel. There is no council chamber that can hide this truth now." The air seemed to crackle with the energy of her act. This was no longer about defense, it was about disclosure. This was never a trial, she continued, her voice trembling not with fear but with righteous fury. It is an execution designed to start a war, an execution of truth, of justice, and of my entire species' right to exist without being the pawns in someone else's game of power. By broadcasting the evidence herself, she transformed it from a court document into a galactic public record. She made every civilian freighter captain, every independent asteroid miner, every curious academic on a remote outpost into a witness and a custodian of the truth. The corrupt powers could silence a single courtroom, they could intimidate a council, but they could never recall a truth that was now sailing on waves of light to a million different destinations. The execution had failed. The war of information had been won not in the halls of power, but in the court of public opinion, and Captain Eva Rostova had just ensured that the verdict would be written by the people, not the puppeteers. The signal from Eva's wrist comm was not a whisper in the dark. It was a scream into a galaxy that had been waiting unknowingly for such a sound. It erupted from the courtroom's primary transmitter, but it did not travel far on its own. The Federation's sensors monitoring the chaotic broadcast reacted with predictable speed. Across the core worlds, the official feed flickered, filled with static, and was replaced by a bland, pre-recorded message about interstellar weather patterns. For a handful of heartbeats, it seemed the truth had been smothered in its cradle. The powerful had once again thrown a switch to maintain their control. But this time, the switch was not connected to a simple circuit. It was connected to the conscience of countless individuals who had been watching the trial unfold with growing unease. Within the labyrinthine server farms of the Galactic News Network, a junior data flow engineer named Lyra, a member of the aviant species known for their keen eyes and fierce belief in transparency, saw the censorship command flash across her console. She had watched the entire trial, her feathers ruffling with indignation at the obvious manipulations. When the Veracity Core confirmed the audio's authenticity and the judge's corruption was laid bare, her professional duty collided with a far deeper moral imperative. As the official feed died, her hands flew across the console. She wasn't alone. Across the Federation, in dark rooms and buzzing control centers, other engineers, a disgruntled Tarkonian, a pair of human expatriates working the night shift on a comms satellite, made the same choice. They were a silent, distributed army of truth, bypassing firewalls and redirecting data streams with a shared, unspoken purpose. The galactic media feed did not go dark. Instead, it split into 1,000 different rivers, each finding a new path to the sea of public consciousness. Pirated, high-fidelity streams of Eva's final, defiant speech, and the damning evidence began appearing on every major public forum, on entertainment channels, even on the informational displays of civilian starliners. The narrative was no longer being shaped by editors or government spokespersons. It was being dumped directly into the living rooms and public squares of 1,000 worlds. Citizens of the Federation, who had been fed a diet of sterile, controlled information for generations, were now witnessing the unvarnished, chaotic collapse of their own judicial system in real time. They saw the judges flee, the guards advance, and a single human woman stand her ground and shout the truth into the teeth of power. Public opinion, a slow and ponderous force, did not merely shift, it underwent a seismic rupture. The carefully cultivated image of the Xylosians as gentle, scholarly victims shattered into a billion pieces, replaced by the cold, tactical voice ordering an ambush. The authority of the Galactic Federation, long taken for granted, evaporated as viewers watched its highest judges exposed as venal criminals. On the desert world of Xerxes, a crowd gathered around a central holoprojector, their sand-scoured faces illuminated by the flickering image of Eva. In the aquatic cities of Oceania, schools of diplomats halted their graceful movements to watch the broadcast bubble up through the water. On human colony worlds, the reaction was a mixture of vindication and fury, a roar of solidarity that echoed through cavernous asteroid habitats and across vast plains. The story was no longer a political scandal, it was a personal one. It was about being lied to by the very institutions meant to protect you. This viral explosion of truth created a firewall around Eva Rostova more impenetrable than any squad of Sentinel guards. The Federation Council, realizing that any attempt to silence or disappear her would now be witnessed by the entire galaxy, had its hands tied. The corrupt judges were swiftly placed under arrest, not as a genuine act of justice, but as a desperate attempt at damage control. The Xylosian ambassador and his delegation were recalled in disgrace, their diplomatic status revoked amid a storm of protests outside their embassies. The victory was not clean, nor was it complete. The underlying conspiracy, the deep-rooted motives for framing humanity, remained to be uncovered. But in that moment, the power dynamic had been irrevocably broken. Captain Eva Rostova, by ensuring her voice could not be contained, had transformed herself from a defendant into a symbol, and in doing so, she had given the galaxy something it had been missing, not just the truth, but the courage to demand it. But the courtroom, for all its significance, was no longer the center of the universe. The true center of gravity had shifted to the cold, airless void outside the station's viewports. As the internal chaos raged, a new presence announced itself. The starfield visible through the massive observation windows began to warp and shimmer, not with the subtle distortion of a single vessel decloaking, but with the massive, coordinated emergence of an entire battle group. These were not the sleek, standardized warships of the Galactic Federation. Their designs were a motley collection of angular brutalism, organic curves, and patched-together hulls, each one bearing the unique insignias of a dozen different independent systems, the collective of free worlds. They were the mercenaries, the miners, the frontier colonies who had long chafed under the Federation's heavy-handed authority, and they now moved with a purpose that was both disciplined and terrifying. The lead ship, a hulking dreadnought that looked like a fortress carved from an asteroid, powered its way to the forefront of the formation. Its comms array activated, and a voice, gruff and weathered by solar winds and 100 border skirmishes, cut through every frequency in the system, overriding the courtroom's internal speakers. It was the voice of Admiral Korvax of the Free Worlds Collective, a figure more legend than man in the Outer Rim. Attention, Judicial Station Themes. This is Admiral Korvax of the collective flagship Indomitable Will. We have monitored the proceedings, we have seen the evidence. The voice was not loud, but it carried an immense weight of absolute conviction. The authority of this court is hereby suspended. Stand down all security forces. Power down your point defense systems. This trial is now under the observation and protection of the collective of free worlds. The truth will be heard in its entirety, and any attempt to interfere will be met with decisive force. The arrival of the collective fleet was not merely a show of support, it was a fundamental alteration of the political landscape. For centuries, the Federation had operated with the assumption that its power was uncontested, that its legal decrees were the final word in civilized space. The free worlds, often dismissed as disorganized pirates and rabble, had just demonstrated a level of coordination and resolve that shattered that assumption. Their declaration was a simple, stark ultimatum. The old rules no longer applied. The courtroom, which moments before had been a sealed environment where a predetermined outcome was being enforced, was now an aquarium, its glass walls smashed open to the ocean outside. Every delegate, every judge, every guard was suddenly, acutely aware that they were no longer the masters of their own fate. They were participants in an event whose scale and consequences had exploded far beyond their control, and the ultimate judges were now the cold, patient warships holding station just a few kilometers away, their weapon ports open and glowing with restrained energy. The sight of the Free Worlds fleet holding position just beyond the viewport was the final straw. The collective will of the corrupt judges, already fractured by the public broadcast of their bribes, shattered completely under the weight of that silent, armored gaze. While the Thull and the gaseous judge had already fled, the head Vorlan judge remained frozen at his dais, a statue of scaled terror. The roaring chaos of the chamber seemed to fade into a distant hum as his world collapsed inward. All the intricate lies, the political maneuvering, the greedy calculations, they evaporated under the stark reality of absolute exposure and now overwhelming force. The pressure was not merely political, it was existential, and it found its release not in a shout but in a broken, guttural wail that erupted from the judge's throat, a sound of pure, undiluted despair. He did not speak to the court, he did not address the guards or the remaining delegates. His head, heavy with horns and shame, dropped into his claws, and his words spilled out, muffled and desperate, as if he were confessing to himself, trying to make sense of his own ruin. It was the only way, he moaned, his voice cracking through the chamber's speakers. They promised us parity, a chance to finally be safe. The admission hung in the air, a bizarre non sequitur that grabbed the attention of everyone nearby. A junior legal aide, her holocorder still active, cautiously moved closer, amplifying his whispered breakdown for the entire galaxy to hear. For cycles, the Xylosians have held the advantage. Their stealth fields are undetectable by any of our long-range scanners. They could be anywhere and we would be blind. Then the true, damning motivation tumbled out, raw and unfiltered. They came to us after the border incident in the Cygnus cloud. They said the humans were the key. Their sensor technology was primitive, yes, but unpredictable, a flaw in our logic. The Xylosians claimed human pilots, with their chaotic, intuitive approach, had a statistically insignificant but non-zero chance of detecting their cloaked vessels through sheer anomaly recognition, a glitch in their perfect system. He looked up, his multifaceted eyes wide with a frantic need to justify the unjustifiable. They said the humans were the only obstacle to a truly secure, predictable galaxy under their protection. All we had to do was remove the anomaly, a single species deemed volatile and expendable, in exchange for the ultimate strategic weapon. they promised us their cloaking technology. The entire schematics in return for a guilty verdict they would make us equals. The confession was so petty, so horrifyingly short-sighted, that it sucked the remaining anger from the room, replacing it with a chilling disgust. The monumental injustice, the conspiracy that had nearly sparked an interstellar war, was not born of some grand ideological conflict. It was rooted in the most mundane of corruptions, fear and technological envy. The mighty Vorlon, a species that projected an image of reptilian impregnability, had been so terrified of a potential future threat that they had willingly become pawns in a scheme to exterminate an entire race for a promised piece of hardware. The idea that humanity was condemned not for what it had done, but for what it might accidentally prevent, revealed a depth of cynicism that left the assembled delegates speechless. In that single, unhinged admission, the conspiracy did not just unravel. It evaporated into meaninglessness, exposed as the craven bargain of frightened bureaucrats trading lives for a false promise of security. The trial was over. There was no verdict to pronounce, only a profound silence where the foundations of Galactic trust had once stood. With the judicial authority of the trial completely shattered, the formalities of Eva's release were almost an afterthought. The corrupt judges were in custody, the Sentinel Guard's protection was now legitimate, and the eyes of the galaxy were fixed upon the aftermath, but the story was far from over. The most critical piece of the puzzle, the one that would transform the narrative from a scandal into a historical reckoning, was still missing: the full, unedited testimony of the Odyssey herself. The Federation Council, in a desperate bid to salvage any shred of credibility, had no choice but to authorize a full forensic investigation. And so, a specialized recovery team was dispatched to the debris field in the Sirius sector, tasked with locating the one object the prosecution claimed was destroyed, the Odyssey's black box. The recovery operation was broadcast across the galactic networks, a silent, solemn procession through a graveyard of twisted metal. The wreckage of the human vessel was scattered across 1,000,000 kilometers, a somber testament to the ferocity of the engagement. The search was painstaking, but the hardened data recorder was designed to survive catastrophic events, and after several tense days it was found, a scorched, cylindrical object no larger than a human forearm, its internal memory cores miraculously intact. The moment it was brought aboard a neutral science vessel for analysis, the entire galaxy seemed to lean in closer. This was not about conflicting testimonies or political accusations anymore. This was about cold, hard data, the immutable record of a ship's final moments. When the data was decrypted and played for the Council, and by extension the public, the truth was revealed with a clarity that was both vindicating and horrifying. The black box logs began with the calm, professional chatter of the Odyssey's bridge crew. Captain Rostova's voice was steady, ordering a standard sensor sweep of the anomalous energy readings in the sector. The logs confirmed the presence of the Xylosian vessel, the Starlight Weaver, but its energy signature was not that of a research ship running delicate instruments. It was the powerful, fluctuating output of a vessel running its weapons systems on a hot stand, by a fact the Odyssey's primitive but effective sensors immediately flagged as a potential threat. The tension on the bridge was palpable in the recording as the Xylosian ship ignored hails and began to maneuver, not to retreat, but to interpose itself between the Odyssey and a clear exit vector. Then came the moment of truth. The logs showed a sudden, massive energy spike from the Starlight Weaver, a signature that matched the power-up sequence of a cloaked plasma torpedo battery. A junior officer's voice, sharp with alarm, called out, "We are being painted multiple targeting locks." On the visual record, which had been carefully edited out of the prosecution's evidence, the space around the Xylosian ship shimmered as its stealth field dropped, revealing not the sleek, scientific lines they had claimed, but the angular, weapon-studded hull of a gunship. A split second later, the first volley of plasma torpedoes erupted from its ports, streaking toward the Odyssey. Captain Rostova's command to return fire, to use their point defense lasers in a desperate bid to intercept the incoming projectiles, was not an act of aggression. It was the last lawful act of a starship commander defending her crew from an unprovoked ambush. The prosecution's edited log, the one that showed a shoot-to-kill order, was exposed as a malicious splice taken from a simulation exercise weeks prior and inserted into the record to create a monstrous lie. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. As the data teams sifted through the wreckage of the Starlight Weaver, cross-referencing the Odyssey's sensor logs with the ship's own publicly declared mass, they found a terrifying discrepancy. The ship was far too heavy for its stated purpose. Deep within its scanned wreckage, analysts identified the distinct shielded containment fields of warheads whose yield classification was reserved for one type of weapon only: planet-buster missiles. These were not merely defensive arms or even standard ship-to-ship munitions. They were weapons of mass destruction designed to crack a world's crust and render it uninhabitable. Their presence on a vessel the Xylosians had claimed was a peaceful research ship carrying children was the final, incontrovertible proof of their duplicity. The Starlight Weaver wasn't just a warship, it was a mobile first strike platform, a violation of so many galactic accords that the list itself was a condemnation. The Xylosians had not been the victims of human violence. They had been the architects of a plot so vast it involved sacrificing one of their own ships to frame humanity and justify a war of extermination, all while hiding a weapon that threatened the sovereignty of every world in the Federation. The recovery of the black box didn't just exonerate humanity. It unveiled a conspiracy of galactic proportions, leaving the former powers of the Federation scrambling to answer for how they could have been so blind or so complicit in the face of such a monstrous threat. The collapse of the conspiracy created a whirlwind of activity within the station, a frantic scramble to contain a scandal that had already escaped into the void. As Sentinel guards moved to secure the corrupt judges and restore a semblance of order, a different, more subtle operation was underway. Station security, their loyalty now firmly aligned with the exposed truth, moved to detain the architects of the plot. The Xylosian ambassador and his delegation, who had moments before been the solemn faces of galactic victimhood, were now targets, but the ambassador, a figure who had mastered the art of political theater, had no intention of playing his part in this final act of accountability. As security teams converged on the Xylosian delegation's private quarters, they found the rooms in disarray, data terminals smashed, and escape plans hastily activated. The ambassador himself was not there. He had used the initial chaos of the courtroom meltdown as a screen, slipping away through a network of service corridors known only to senior diplomatic personnel. His flight was not the panicked scramble of a common criminal, but the calculated retreat of a strategist who had prepared for every contingency, including failure. For a tense hour, it seemed he might evade justice, vanishing into the labyrinthine depths of the station or perhaps onto a cloaked escape pod. But the station's internal sensor net, now being scrutinized by a coalition of Brivac and Sentinel technicians loyal to the new investigation, picked up an anomalous energy signature, the faint, telltale ripple of a personal stealth field, moving toward a little-used docking bay reserved for emergency diplomatic launches. The security team that cornered him in the bay found him not cowering, but standing with an eerie calm beside a sleek, unmarked shuttle, its engines already humming with pre-launch power. His delicate, scholarly demeanor had completely vanished, shed like a useless skin. The large, luminous eyes that had once projected such profound grief now burned with a cold, focused intensity. He made no move to surrender, offering no resistance as the guards surrounded him, their weapons raised. His gaze was fixed not on his captors, but on Captain Eva Rostova, who had been brought to the bay to formally identify him. It was as if the rest of the universe had faded away, leaving only the two of them in a final, silent confrontation between the lie he had built and the truth she had unmasked. As the guards moved to apply restraints, the ambassador finally spoke. His voice, once a melodic instrument of feigned sorrow, was now a dry, contemptuous rasp stripped of all pretense. He did not address the guards or plead his case. He looked directly at Eva, and a sneer twisted his features. "You," he hissed, the word laden with a hatred that felt ancient and deep. "You think this is a victory. You have won nothing but a postponement." He took a half-step forward, ignoring the weapons trained on him, his entire being radiating a pure, undiluted scorn. "Your kind's curiosity is a disease," he snarled, spitting the words as if they were poison. "Your relentless need to probe, to question, to touch everything you cannot understand, it spreads chaos. It unravels order. We did not frame you out of fear of your weapons, human. We sought to cure the galaxy of your infection." In that single, venomous admission, the last piece of the puzzle clicked into place with chilling finality. The motive was not territorial ambition, not resource acquisition, not even simple political power. It was something far more fundamental and far more terrifying, a profound genocidal xenophobia. The Xylosians, with their clandestine warships and planet-busting weapons, saw themselves not as conquerors but as hygienists. They viewed humanity's inherent drive to explore, to learn, to connect, the very qualities we often celebrate as our greatest strengths, as a pathological condition, a virus of unpredictability threatening their vision of a sterile, perfectly controlled cosmos. The entire elaborate frame-up, the sacrifice of their own crew, the corruption of the judiciary, had all been an act of galactic quarantine, an attempt to exterminate a species they deemed sick simply for being what it was. The ambassador's capture was not just the arrest of a criminal, it was the unveiling of an ideological abyss, a reminder that in the vastness of space, the greatest threat might not be a desire for domination, but a conviction of absolute purity. The chaotic energy of the courtroom had subsided, replaced by the stark, orderly quiet of the media briefing room. Captain Eva Rostova stood before a galaxy of holocams, the swirling lenses representing billions of viewers on countless worlds. The Sentinel Guard stood at a respectful distance, and the officials of the fractured Federation Council waited nervously in the wings, expecting a statement of gratitude, perhaps even a declaration of human victory. But Eva's face held no triumph. Her expression was grave, etched with the weight of what she had learned not just about her enemies, but about the fragile nature of truth itself. She leaned toward the microphones, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable gravity that silenced the last rustle of movement in the room. "What you witnessed here today," she began, her words measured, "was not a human victory." The statement landed with a quiet force, causing a ripple of confusion. She continued, her gaze sweeping across the assembled media. "To call it that would be to misunderstand everything that has just happened. This was not a battle between species where one side wins and the other loses. What unfolded in that courtroom was a failure, a catastrophic failure of the systems that are supposed to protect all of us from the very darkness we just uncovered." She paused, allowing the concept to settle. The real victory here does not belong to humanity. It belongs to the evidence. It belongs to the unflinching logic of the veracity core. It belongs to the courage of a lone Viridian operative who refused to be silent. The victory belongs to the truth and the truth alone. She then shifted her tone, her voice gaining a sharper, more urgent edge. And that truth carries with it a warning far more critical than any celebration. We have seen the face of the real enemy, and it is not the Xylosians. It is not their warships or their planet-busting weapons. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto the cameras as if speaking directly to every individual watching. The true adversary, the most dangerous force in the universe, is the lie. The lie that any one species, any one government, any one ideology has the right to be judge, jury, and executioner for another. She emphasized each word, letting them hang in the air. That is the poison that almost destroyed us. The Xylosians believed their vision of order was so absolute that they had the right to erase us for not fitting into it. And the judges of the Federation, driven by fear and greed, believed their authority was so unquestionable that they could legitimize that erasure with a gavel. Both actions sprang from the same fatal arrogance. This was no longer a recap of the trial. It was a philosophical dissection of its root causes. This arrogance is a virus, she stated, her analogy stark and clear. And it can infect anyone. It is the belief that your perspective is the only valid one, that your security justifies any atrocity, that your definition of civilized gives you the right to declare others monsters. The moment we accept that any being, no matter how advanced, can hold that power over another, we have already lost. We create a galaxy where every species is perpetually on trial, constantly having to prove its worth to avoid extermination. That is not a community of worlds. That is a prison yard monitored by guards who have appointed themselves both warden and executioner. She concluded not with a call to arms, but with a call to vigilance. So let this be a lesson written in starlight. Our strength will never lie in building higher walls or perfecting our stealth technology. It will lie in our unwavering commitment to transparency, to holding power accountable, and to remembering that our differences are not a weakness to be eradicated, but a strength to be understood. The next time you hear a story that seems too simple, that paints an entire species with a single brushstroke of guilt, remember this moment, question it. Demand the evidence, because the cost of believing a convenient lie is always paid in blood. With a final, solemn nod, she stepped away from the podium, leaving behind not the euphoria of an acquittal, but the sobering responsibility of a truth that had been narrowly rescued from oblivion. And so, the gears of galactic bureaucracy, long rusted by complacency and corruption, were forced into a groaning, reluctant motion. In the days following the trial's spectacular implosion, the formal announcements began to emanate from the Federation's central citadel. They were masterclasses in political damage control, crafted to project an image of decisive action while carefully managing the fallout. A senior counselor, her species' feathery crest held in a posture of solemn authority, appeared on every public channel to declare a full-scale, multi-species investigation into the Xylosian government. The language was severe, promising to uncover the full extent of their clandestine weapons programs and their conspiracy to incite interstellar war. It was a necessary step, a public severing of ties with a now toxic ally, but it was also a convenient way for the Federation to reposition itself as the victim of Xylosian deception, subtly shifting the blame and downplaying its own profound institutional failures. Simultaneously came the pronouncement regarding the tribunal itself. The corrupt judges were not merely removed, the entire judicial panel was officially disbanded, its authority nullified. The Federation promised a sweeping review of its judicial protocols, vowing to create a new, transparent system with safeguards against such blatant manipulation. They spoke of independent oversight committees, randomized judge selection from a pool of neutral species, and mandatory verification of all evidence through the veracity cause before it could be presented in court. On the surface, these were exactly the reforms needed. They were the logical, expected responses to a scandal of this magnitude. But for anyone who had witnessed the raw, unfiltered truth of the trial, these announcements rang with a hollow, procedural tone. They were treating the symptoms, the bribed judges, the suppressed evidence, but skirting the deeper, more insidious disease that Captain Rostova had identified, the arrogance of power that had allowed the system to become rigged in the first place. The true significance of these announcements, therefore, was not in their words, but in the unspoken context that gave them weight. The Federation was not acting out of a sudden, pure-hearted commitment to justice. It was acting because its back was against the wall. The viral broadcast of the trial had ignited a firestorm of public outrage across 1,000-member worlds. Planets that had passively accepted Federation decrees for generations were now holding mass protests, their governments demanding accountability and threatening to withdraw from the Union. More critically, the arrival of the free world's collective fleet had fundamentally altered the balance of power. The Federation could no longer assume its authority was unchallenged. Its promises of reform were, in essence, a peace offering a desperate attempt to reclaim legitimacy in the eyes of its own citizens and to appease the formidable independent powers now watching its every move from just beyond the border. This created a fragile, unprecedented moment in galactic history. The old order, built on a foundation of controlled information and centralized power, had cracked. In its place arose a new, more volatile dynamic defined by radical transparency and distributed authority. The Federation's investigation would proceed, but it would do so under the unblinking gaze of the galactic media, citizen journalists, and the intelligence agencies of the free world. Every finding, every delay, every attempt to whitewash the truth would be instantly scrutinized and broadcast. The promise of reform was no longer a closed-door policy discussion. It was a public performance, and the audience had become the final arbiters of its success. The survival of the Galactic Federation itself now hinged on its ability to deliver genuine change, to prove that it could evolve from an instrument of control into a genuine guardian of justice for all species, not just the powerful ones. The story was no longer about a single rigged trial. It was about whether an entire galactic civilization could learn from its near-fatal mistake and rebuild itself on a more honest and more humble foundation. In the wake of the official pronouncements and the slow, grinding machinery of galactic accountability, a private meeting was convened in the station's highest-level diplomatic suite. The setting was a stark contrast to the brutalist amphitheater of the courtroom. Here, the walls were transparent, offering a breathtaking, silent view of the star-dusted void and the patient, watchful fleet of the free world's collective. Seated across from Captain Rostova were the most powerful beings left in the fractured Federation hierarchy: the acting chief counselor, a serene but weary-looking being of crystalline form, and the newly appointed head of the Sentinel Guard. The atmosphere was one of solemn, almost painful formality. They did not offer platitudes or hollow congratulations. Instead, they presented her with a data slate containing what they termed a full and unconditional formal apology from the Galactic Federation to the human species and to her personally, acknowledging the profound injustice and the systemic failures that had enabled it. But the apology was merely the preamble to their true proposal. The counselor's voice, a soft chime like crystal bells, outlined a bold new initiative: the creation of a joint species task force, unprecedented in its scope and authority. Its mandate would be to investigate the full extent of the Xylosian conspiracy, to hunt down their hidden bases, and to expose any other potential aggressions they might have planned. It was to be a symbol of the new transparency, a multi-species endeavor led by the one individual whose integrity was now beyond question. Captain Rostova, the counselor intoned, "We can think of no one better suited to command this operation. You have the trust of the galaxy. You would have unlimited resources, a fleet at your disposal, and the authority to subpoena any record, any individual, anywhere in Federation space. This is our chance to truly root out the corruption and ensure this can never happen again." It was the ultimate offer of restitution, a position of immense power crafted specifically for her, a chance to become the chief architect of a new, more just galactic order. The room fell silent, the weight of the offer hanging in the air. The Sentinel Guard commander nodded his agreement, his cybernetic eye glinting. They expected acceptance. How could she refuse? It was the logical next step, the heroic culmination of her journey from accused to savior. But Eva's gaze was not on them. It was fixed on the starfield outside, on the pinpricks of light that marked distant, unexplored systems. When she finally turned back, her expression was not one of ambition or vengeance, but of profound, unshakable clarity. She placed the data slate gently on the table between them. "The apology," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "is noted, and on behalf of my crew it is accepted, but I must decline the command." A ripple of stunned confusion passed between the officials. The counselor, crystalline facets shimmered with disbelief. "Captain, surely you understand the importance of this." "I do," Eva interrupted, not with rudeness but with a gentle finality. "I understand its importance perfectly, but my place is not at the head of an armada hunting for remnants of a failed conspiracy. My place is with my crew." She paused, allowing the simple statement to settle. The men and women of the Odyssey signed on for a mission of exploration, to map nebulas, to study pulsars, to make first contact with species who have never heard our names. That mission was interrupted by a lie, but it was not completed. She looked from the counselor to the commander, her eyes holding a depth of conviction that no political appointment could ever offer. "Our mission was exploration," she repeated, her words carrying the weight of a personal oath. "And that mission is not over." In that elegant, understated refusal, Captain Eva Rostova made her most powerful statement yet. By turning down the command, she was rejecting the very premise that had led to the crisis, the idea that security is achieved through suspicion, control, and the rooting out of enemies. She was choosing, instead, to reaffirm the core value that the Xylosians had found so threatening: humanity's innate, insatiable curiosity. She was declaring that the true defense of the galaxy did not lie in building better weapons or more powerful investigative bodies, but in continuing to reach out, to understand, and to connect. To go back to the stars not as soldiers or inquisitors, but as students. Her decision sent a clearer message than any task force ever could, that the greatest rebuke to those who would build walls is to simply keep walking past them, with a hand extended in greeting rather than a weapon raised in fear. The exploration would continue, and in doing so, it would become the most enduring monument to the truth she had fought so hard to reveal. The station's main docking bay was a cavern of organized chaos, a stark contrast to the sterile quiet of the courtroom and the diplomatic suites. Here, the air hummed with the palpable energy of real work, the deep thrum of engines powering up, the hiss of pressurization seals, and the shouted coordinates of loadmasters guiding cargo into the holds of waiting vessels. In the midst of this purposeful symphony stood Captain Eva Rostova, but her uniform was different. Gone were the simple, anonymous clothes of a defendant. She was clad once more in the crisp black and deep blue of an Earth Confederacy deep space explorer, the silver comet insignia of her rank glittering on her collar. Before her, sleek and new, sat her command, not a replacement for the lost Odyssey, but a successor vessel, the Resolute. Its lines were sharper, its sensor arrays more advanced, a ship built not just for travel but for rediscovery. She was running a final systems check on her datapad, the familiar routine a welcome anchor in the whirlwind of the past days, when a calm, familiar voice spoke from behind her. "You wear the uniform well again, Captain." Eva turned to find the hooded figure from the recess chamber, but the heavy robe was gone. Standing before her was Kalen, the Viridian operative, and he was no longer a shadow. He wore the formal, grey and silver tunic of a reinstated senior director of the Viridian Intelligence Directorate. His features, once obscured, were sharp and intelligent, with eyes that held the weary depth of someone who had seen too many truths buried and had fought to unearth them regardless of the cost. A subtle, genuine smile touched his lips, a stark contrast to the grim severity of their first encounter. The Directorate saw the error of their ways, he explained, anticipating her unspoken question. "It is remarkable how quickly a public scandal can clarify one's career prospects. They have not only reinstated me, they have given me a new mandate, to ensure the echo stream of galactic politics is never again silenced. He stepped closer, his voice lowering, not out of secrecy but with a tone of profound respect. What you did in that chamber, it was more than a legal defense. It was a seismic event. He gestured vaguely in the direction of the now empty courtroom. For cycles, the Federation has operated on a simple, unspoken principle. That power flows from the top down, that authority is a monolith to be obeyed. They believed their narrative was unassailable because they controlled the means of its dissemination. They demanded silence, and for so long, silence was what they received. Kaelin's gaze intensified, locking with hers. But you spoke. You did not just present an argument, you weaponized transparency. You took their own rules, their own vaunted technology, and you turned it into a spotlight that exposed the rot at the very foundation of their power. He paused, letting the sounds of the docking bay fill the space between them, the clangs and hums that were the sounds of a galaxy moving forward, not trapped in a sterile courtroom. You have reminded every citizen on every world of a truth they had almost forgotten. Kaelin continued, his words measured and heavy with significance. That empires, no matter how vast, are not built on fleets or treaties or technology. They are built on perception, on the collective agreement to believe in their authority. And you demonstrated for all to see that a single voice, armed with nothing but unwavering conviction and the courage to speak an inconvenient truth, can shatter that perception into a million pieces. He placed a hand on the hull of the Resolute, a gesture of solidarity. The echoes of what you started will ripple through this galaxy for generations. You have not just secured your people's future, Captain Rostova. You have given the entire galaxy its voice back. Now, go and use yours to show us what we should be listening for. With a final, respectful nod, he turned and melted back into the flow of dockworkers, leaving Eva alone with her ship and the immense, silent weight of the stars waiting beyond the bay doors. The docking bay doors of the judicial station slid open with a silent, majestic sweep, revealing the star-dusted velvet of deep space. With a low, gathering hum that reverberated through the very deck plates, the engines of the Resolute ignited, casting a brilliant, clean blue light that pushed back against the artificial glow of the station. There was no fanfare, no grand speech from its captain. There was only the deliberate, purposeful motion of a ship returning to its natural element. It eased forward, clearing the magnetic containment field, and for a moment hung suspended against the infinite black, a sliver of polished metal and human ambition poised on the edge of the unknown. Then, with a silent, breathtaking contraction of reality, the warp drive engaged, space itself folded around the vessel, and in a flash of distorted light, the Resolute was gone, leaving behind only the faintest ripple in the cosmic fabric and a destination known only to its crew. This quiet departure was the final, most powerful statement in the entire saga. The trial, for all its galactic drama, was now a closed chapter, a scar on the history of the Federation. The Resolute was not sailing away from that history, but carrying its lessons forward. Its mission was no longer just about exploration in the simple, cartographic sense. It had become a living embodiment of a new principle, one forged in the crucible of injustice. Every new star system it charted, every first contact it made, would now be an act of defiance against the Xylosian philosophy of fearful isolation. It was a declaration that the galaxy would be understood through open-handed curiosity, not controlled through clandestine weapons and manufactured lies. The ship itself had been transformed into a beacon, not of conquest, but of a relentless, questioning spirit that refuses to be silenced. And so, the story that began in the cold, antiseptic air of a rigged courtroom finds its true ending not in a verdict or a political settlement, but in the silent, infinite potential of the warp jump. The trial was indeed rigged, constructed on a foundation of lies so deep they nearly triggered a war. But that entire elaborate structure, built by senators and admirals, shattered into nothingness the moment a single human being, standing alone, chose to speak a simple, inconvenient truth. That act, more devastating than any plasma torpedo, did not just exonerate a captain or a species. It sent a shockwave through the very architecture of power, reminding every civilization, from the most ancient to the newly spacefaring, that true authority does not flow from the top down. It resides in the courage of individuals to demand evidence, to question narratives, and to speak, even when their voice is the only one raised in a hostile room. The balance of the galaxy was forever altered not by a fleet action or a treaty signing, but by the unyielding power of a truth once spoken that could never be